The alien market was filled with noise and strange light. Rows of cages stood beneath the glowing sky of the Lyran Dominion, each holding men and women from different worlds. Among them stood a single human, Ethan. His clothes were torn, his hands bruised, but his eyes still carried a kind of calm strength that did not belong to a slave. Traders shouted prices, aliens laughed, and the sound of chains mixed with the hum of machines. Yet Ethan stood silent, his head held high. High above, in a balcony made of crystal and silver, Queen Seraphina watched. She ruled 1,000 worlds, her empire known for both wisdom and cold order. Her skin glowed faintly blue, her eyes bright like a twin star. She had never seen a human before, only read reports. Fragile, emotional, impulsive creatures from a small planet near a yellow sun. But something in Ethan's stillness caught her attention. While others looked broken, this one did not bow. He looked back at the crowd as if they were the ones in cages. The trader noticed the Queen's gaze and smiled. "Your Majesty," he shouted. This human was once an engineer before capture. Strong, clever, untrained in submission, but easy to break. He hit the cage with a rod, making a sharp sound. Ethan didn't move. His voice was calm, low. "You can hit metal, but you can't break what you don't understand." The crowd laughed, but the Queen didn't. Her long hand rested on the rail as she studied him more closely. Her aide, a tall alien with silver skin, whispered, "My Queen. Such a creature has no worth. They are unpredictable and full of defiance." Seraphina's eyes stayed fixed on the human. "Perhaps," she said softly, "that is what makes him worth something." When the bidding began, aliens offered small sums, mostly for amusement. None wanted to deal with a human who looked unafraid. Then, to everyone's shock, the Queen raised her hand. The entire hall went silent. The trader almost dropped his tablet. "Your Majesty, you wish to—" "I will take him," she said simply. "Deliver him to the palace. Feed him, give him clothes, and remove those chains." The room froze in disbelief. A queen buying a slave was not strange, but buying a human and ordering him treated well was unheard of. Some bowed quickly, others whispered. Ethan stood still, trying to understand what had just happened. Hours later, the transport ship carried him toward the shining capital. He sat quietly in the corner, watching the stars pass like silver dust. His thoughts were mixed with fear and confusion. Why would an alien queen buy a human? What did she want from him? When they arrived, he was led through vast crystal corridors that shone like frozen rivers. Strange music filled the air. Servants bowed as the Queen entered the hall. Her presence was calm and strong, her long gown made of woven light. She looked at him not as a ruler but as someone trying to read a mystery. "You are called Ethan," she said softly. He nodded. "You are not a warrior, not a leader. Why did you not beg or resist at the market?" He looked at her for a moment, then spoke slowly. "Because begging never gave anyone their freedom, and I didn't resist because I have nowhere left to run." Something in his voice caught her off guard. There was no hatred, only quiet truth. She had seen generals kneel, seen enemies scream, but never a prisoner who spoke without fear. "Do you hate me?" she asked. He shook his head. "I don't know you." The Queen dismissed the guards and stood closer, curious. "You humans are strange. You lose everything, and yet you still speak like you have hope." He gave a faint smile. "Hope is the last thing we lose." Her eyes lingered on him for a long moment. Then she turned away and said, "You are no longer in chains. You will work in the palace until I decide otherwise. You will have food, rest, and freedom to walk within the gardens. You belong to the crown now." Ethan's reply was quiet. "No one belongs to anyone, Your Majesty. But I'll follow your rules." She looked back, surprised by his words, but there was no anger in her expression, only interest. "We will see, human. Perhaps one day I will understand why your kind cannot be tamed." As he was led to his new chamber, Ethan glanced once more at the Queen. For the first time since his capture, he felt something he couldn't explain. It wasn't trust. It wasn't peace. It was the faint, strange sense that his story on this alien world had only just begun, and that the woman who had bought him might not be his captor after all, but the one person who would change everything. The first morning in the Crystal Palace felt unreal to Ethan. Sunlight passed through the transparent walls and painted soft blue lines on the floor. The air smelled faintly of flowers that did not exist on Earth. Servants moved quietly, avoiding his gaze, unsure how to treat a human who was no longer chained. They left him clean clothes made of soft silver fabric, and guided him to a small dining hall filled with gentle light. Everything around him was calm, but he could not forget that he was still a stranger in a foreign world. When Queen Seraphina entered, everyone in the hall bowed except Ethan. He stood straight, unsure if he should follow their ways. She noticed it but said nothing. She sat across from him, a quiet smile on her face. "Do humans not bow to rulers?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated. "We bow to respect someone's heart, not their title." Her eyes studied him with curiosity. "Then you see no heart in me?" He met her gaze carefully. "I don't know you yet." For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then, instead of anger, the queen laughed softly. "Then perhaps we should change that." She dismissed the servants and poured her own drink, something no ruler ever did. Ethan watched her every movement, unsure what she wanted from him. Over the next few days, Seraphina began to speak with him often. She asked about Earth, about oceans, rain, and cities. Ethan told her how humans built machines that touched the sky and dreamed of peace even when surrounded by war. She listened with quiet fascination. To her, humans had always been described as simple and emotional. Yet Ethan's words carried balance, sadness, and wonder all at once. One evening, she walked with him through the royal gardens. The plants glowed faintly under the twin moons, their petals opening like living lights. The queen's long robe brushed softly against the crystal path as she said, "Your world sounds fragile but full of beauty." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's true. We break easily, but we build again. Maybe that's what makes us human." She stopped walking and turned toward him. "And if something cannot be rebuilt?" He looked at her, his voice calm. "Then we carry it inside us until we find something worth building again." She seemed to think deeply about that answer. The next day, she invited him to the Hall of Memories, a large chamber filled with relics from different worlds the Dominion had conquered. In the center was a small object covered in dust, a piece of metal with faded English letters. Ethan stepped closer and realized it was part of a human spacecraft broken long ago. He ran his hand over it gently. "You keep this?" he asked quietly. Seraphina nodded. "It was from the first human ship we found. My people saw it as proof of our victory, but I kept it because I thought it was beautiful." Ethan smiled sadly. "It's not victory that makes things beautiful. It's what they meant before they were broken." His words struck something inside her. For the first time, Seraphina felt ashamed of what her empire had done. She walked closer and asked, "Do humans always speak this way, with sorrow and hope mixed together?" Ethan looked at her, his voice soft. "We speak that way because we never stop hoping, even when sorrow tries to silence us." That night, the queen could not sleep. She thought about what he said, about how her palace was filled with trophies from conquered worlds. She looked at the stars beyond her window and wondered if power truly meant anything without understanding. The next morning, she surprised the court. She ordered the Hall of Memories to be open to visitors from every species, not just nobles. When her advisors questioned her, she said, "The past must be shared if we are to move beyond it." Later, she met Ethan in the garden again. "Your words have changed something in me," she admitted. "You see meaning in small things. You carry hope where others would only carry anger." Ethan looked at her kindly. Sometimes hope is the only thing left when everything else is gone. As days passed, the distance between them began to fade. She no longer called him human or slave. She called him by name, and every time she said it, it carried warmth. Ethan began to notice that her once commanding tone softened when she spoke to him. They started sharing meals without servants, talking late into the night about life, peace, and what it meant to belong somewhere. One evening, when a soft storm of glowing dust fell from the sky, Seraphina looked out across her palace and said, "Do you miss your world?" Ethan's answer was slow. "I miss the sound of rain, but I don't miss the cages we build for ourselves." She turned to him, her eyes bright. Perhaps we both lived in cages we did not see. The moment felt quiet and real, and for the first time they smiled at each other not as queen and servant, but as two souls who finally understood the same kind of loneliness. Days in the Lyran palace began to blend into quiet rhythm. Ethan learned the language better, helped repair the palace machines, and spent long hours walking through glowing corridors that reflected his face like a ghost from another world. The queen often joined him, not as a ruler, but as someone who seemed to search for something she had never known before. She no longer spoke like a conqueror when she was with him. Her voice grew soft, her eyes thoughtful. One afternoon, Serafina brought him to a small chamber high above the city. It looked out over shining towers that reached into the clouds. In the middle of the room was a strange device made of glass and light. She said quietly, "This is a memory keeper. It holds voices of the past. Would you show me how humans remember?" Ethan hesitated, then placed his hand on the device. A faint sound began to play, an old recording of ocean waves and children laughing. The sound filled the room like a dream. The queen stood still, her lips parted slightly. "What is that sound?" she whispered. "It's the sea," Ethan said. "On Earth, it covers most of the planet. The waves never stop moving, no matter how many storms pass." She closed her eyes, listening to the endless rhythm. "It sounds alive," she said softly. "It is," Ethan replied. "It reminds us that no matter what we lose, life keeps moving forward." When the sound faded, the queen stood in silence. Her expression changed from curiosity to sadness. She turned to him and said, "My empire has taken so much. I have ordered wars that left whole worlds silent. And yet this sound of your sea feels more powerful than any army." Ethan looked at her calmly. "Maybe power was never about control. Maybe it's about what we protect." His words settled deep inside her like a slow light. That night, Serafina could not sleep. She dreamed of a blue world filled with wind and laughter. She saw herself walking beside him on sand she had never touched, her crown left behind in the tide. When she woke, her heart felt heavy and warm at the same time. The next day, she visited him again, holding the same metal fragment from the Hall of Memories. "You said this meant something before it was broken," she began. "Can you show me what it might have looked like when it was whole?" Ethan studied the fragment carefully, then asked for tools. For hours, he worked in silence while she watched. His hands were steady, his eyes focused. When he finished, he pressed a button, and the fragment glowed faintly, projecting an image of the small human ship it once belonged to. Serafina's breath caught. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It was called Aurora," Ethan said. "A ship of exploration, not war. It carried families, dreamers, people who wanted to see the stars, not conquer them." The queen stared at the projection, then slowly sank into her seat. "You make me see everything differently," she whispered. "All my life I thought peace was only possible through strength. But you—" She stopped, unable to finish. Ethan smiled gently. "Maybe peace needs both. Strength to protect it and kindness to make it real." Her eyes lifted to his face, and for the first time she saw not a servant, not a human, but something deeper. She reached out her hand, hesitating. "Ethan," she said quietly, "when I look at you, I feel something unfamiliar. My people call it weakness, but it feels honest." He met her eyes, steady and kind. "It's not weakness. It's the start of understanding." After that day, something changed between them. The queen began to spend more time with him, asking about human art, music, and the meaning of simple words like home. Ethan taught her how humans painted with emotion, how they built small houses to keep love close, not to keep others out. He noticed how she listened as if every word was precious. One evening, as the twin suns set behind the crystal towers, Serafina asked quietly, "Why do your people forgive so easily? You were taken from your world, yet you do not hate us." Ethan looked at the horizon where red light met gold. "Because hate doesn't build anything," he said. "It only burns what's left. Sometimes forgiveness is the only way to stay human." She thought about his answer for a long time. The next day, she made a choice that startled her court. She declared that all humans under Lyran rule would no longer be treated as property. They would be protected citizens. The council protested, saying it was madness. But she only said, "If understanding makes me mad, then so be it." That evening, Ethan found her standing alone on the balcony. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. She looked at him with calm eyes. "I did. Because your words showed me what kind of ruler I want to be." The stars reflected on her face like tiny fires. For a long moment, neither spoke. They just stood there, two beings from different worlds, both beginning to see what the other truly was. Something fragile and deep had started to grow between them. Something no empire could command or forbid. It was quiet, real, and alive. The news of the Queen's new law spread across the empire like a spark in dry grass. Many aliens in the Lyran Dominion whispered in disbelief. Some admired her decision, but others called it dangerous and weak. The Royal Council gathered the next morning with tense faces and sharp voices. They stood before the throne as Queen Seraphina listened in calm silence, her long robe trailing like silver water across the marble floor. One elder spoke loudly. "Your Majesty, this human has clouded your judgment. The Dominion was built on order and strength. You risk everything for a species that lost its own world." Seraphina's eyes stayed steady. "Strength without compassion is not order. It is fear." Another counselor leaned forward. "Forgive me, my queen, but your compassion will destroy us. Your people follow your will because they see you as flawless. If they see you favoring a human, they will lose faith." Ethan stood quietly at the edge of the hall, his hands clasped. He didn't want to speak, but the words aimed at him cut deep. Seraphina noticed his discomfort and said softly, "Leave us, Ethan." He hesitated, then bowed and left the chamber. The queen faced the council again. "The human you speak of has shown me something your reports never could. Truth. He has no army, no power, yet he has changed how I see the world. That is strength of a different kind." But the council was not convinced. They demanded that Ethan be removed from the palace. When the queen refused, they gave her a warning. If she continued to defy their advice, they would call for a formal vote to strip her of her crown. Later that day, Ethan walked alone in the palace garden, staring at the glowing trees and quiet pools. His thoughts were heavy. He had never asked for the queen's protection, and now his presence might destroy everything she built. When Seraphina found him there, he didn't turn around. "You heard them," he said quietly. "Your people will not forgive this. I should leave before they make you lose everything." Her voice was calm but sad. "You think leaving would protect me? They will still call me weak. They will still fear what they cannot understand." He turned to face her. "Then let them fear me, not you. Let them say I took advantage of your kindness. You don't deserve this burden." Seraphina stepped closer, her eyes shining faintly in the soft light. "You don't understand, Ethan. You have already changed what I am. I cannot go back to what I was before you came." He looked at her carefully, unsure what to say. "You are their queen. You can't risk your empire for someone like me." She smiled sadly. "You still see yourself as less. That is the only thing that truly breaks my heart." For a moment, neither spoke. The air was still except for the quiet sound of water. Then Seraphina said, "If you truly believe you should go, I will not stop you. But know this, I did not buy you to own you. I brought you here because I wanted to understand humanity, and now that I do, I find that I am not as different from you as I once thought." Ethan lowered his head. "If I stay, you may lose everything. If I go, you'll stand alone," her voice softened. "A ruler is always alone, Ethan, but a friend makes that loneliness bearable." That night, Ethan sat by his window watching the lights of the city below. He could hear faint music carried on the wind, songs in a language he could barely understand. His heart was torn between gratitude and guilt. He wanted to stay near her, but he also knew his presence was tearing her world apart. When morning came, he made his choice. He went to the throne room quietly while the guards changed shifts. The queen was there already, standing near the window that looked out over the horizon. She turned when she sensed him. "You're leaving?" she said softly, as if she had known all along. He nodded. "It's better this way." She walked closer, her steps light. "Will you return to your people?" "If they'll have me," he said. "But no matter where I go, I won't forget what I learned here." Her eyes glimmered. "Nor will I. You taught me that understanding is stronger than fear." Ethan smiled faintly. "And you taught me that not all power needs to hurt." She reached out her hand and he took it gently. For a long moment they stood in silence. Two worlds, two hearts, both changed forever. Then she released him and whispered, "Go, before I change my mind." Ethan walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading down the long hall. Seraphina watched him until he disappeared into the light. When the doors closed, she felt something inside her ache deeply, a quiet emptiness she had never known. She turned back to the window, her reflection soft in the crystal glass. The Empire still waited for her commands, but the only thing she wanted now was something no crown could ever give her. The sky outside shimmered with the first signs of dawn, and for the first time in her long reign, the Queen of the Lyran Dominion whispered to herself words that no one heard, words not of rule or power, but of hope and loss for a single human who had taught her what it meant to feel alive. Days turned into weeks since Ethan had left the palace. The Queen continued her duties, her face calm before her people, but her heart carried a quiet emptiness that grew heavier with every sunrise. The council had stopped questioning her, believing the human's departure had restored her reason. Yet Serafina felt no peace. The halls that once echoed with conversation now seemed hollow. Even the shining gardens looked dull without his presence. Ethan had returned to a small human colony on the far edge of Lyran space. The people there welcomed him with disbelief. Few humans had ever seen the capital and lived to tell the tale. They called him lucky, but Ethan didn't feel lucky at all. Every night he looked at the stars, searching for the bright one that marked Serafina's world. He tried to bury his thoughts in work, helping rebuild ships and shelters. But memories of the Queen's calm voice and curious eyes kept returning to him. One evening, while working in the repair bay, he overheard a transmission between trade ships. The voices were urgent. The Lyran Dominion was in trouble. A neighboring power, an old rival species known for greed and expansion, had moved its fleet close to the border. Many believed they would attack within days. Ethan froze when he heard that the capital might soon fall under siege. His chest tightened with worry. He knew what kind of ruler Serafina was, too proud to surrender, too compassionate to abandon her people. For hours he paced in silence. He told himself it wasn't his fight, that he was just one man. But deep down he knew he couldn't stay away. She had risked everything for him. Now it was his turn to do something for her. The next morning he met the leader of the human colony and asked for a ship. The man stared at him in shock. "You can't go back there, Ethan. If war begins, no human ship will be safe." Ethan smiled faintly. "I know, but she once stood alone to protect me. I can't let her stand alone again." Meanwhile, on Lyran Prime, the Queen's Council met in panic. Reports of enemy fleets filled the air. Her generals demanded evacuation, but Serafina refused. "A ruler must not run while her people are still here," she said quietly. "If we lose this world, we lose more than land, we lose hope." That night she walked alone to the highest balcony. The sky was red with the light of distant engines. She thought of Ethan's words about the sea that never stopped moving, no matter how many storms came. She wondered if she would ever see him again. The following day, as the city prepared for defense, sensors detected an unknown ship approaching. Alarms blared until they identified the signal. It was human. The soldiers hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. But when the small craft landed, and Ethan stepped out wearing a pilot's uniform patched with the human colony's emblem, the Queen herself came to the landing bay. He bowed slightly, smiling with tired eyes. "I hope I'm not too late." Serafina stood frozen for a moment, unable to speak. Then her expression softened and she walked closer. "You shouldn't have come back. It's dangerous." Ethan looked around at the rushing soldiers and smoke rising from the defense towers. "Dangerous doesn't matter. You said once that strength comes from what we protect. I came to help protect you." The Queen's eyes glimmered with emotion she could no longer hide. "You've already done more than enough." "Not yet," he said quietly. "I promised myself I wouldn't leave you alone again." Together they moved to the command room. The generals looked uncertain, whispering about the human who had returned. But when Ethan began adjusting their old defense systems, his skill surprised them all. He rerouted power to the shield grid and repaired broken signal relays that no Lyran engineer had been able to fix. Within hours, the capital's outer defenses began to stabilize. The Queen watched in silent admiration, realizing how much she had missed his calm focus. As night fell, the first enemy ships appeared beyond the horizon. The city's defense towers glowed, ready to fire. Ethan stood beside Serafina on the balcony as the air trembled with energy. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "I'm glad I came back." She looked at him, her voice almost a whisper. "Even if it means your life?" He smiled faintly. "A life means little if it's lived without meaning." The battle began. The sky turned to fire as ships clashed above the planet. Inside the palace, tremors shook the walls. Ethan worked without rest, directing power surges and repairing damaged systems. The Queen refused to leave his side, her presence steady and fierce. When the final wave of the enemy fleet broke apart against the shields, the city erupted in light. The danger had passed. The enemy withdrew. When the silence finally returned, Ethan collapsed from exhaustion. Serafina caught him before he hit the floor. For a moment she held him close, feeling the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. Around them her people cheered their victory, but she heard only the quiet sound of his breathing. "You came back for me," she whispered. His voice was weak but certain. "I told you." The sea never stops moving. She smiled through tears, holding him tighter as the sky cleared above the shining towers. The Empire was safe, but for Serafina, the true victory was knowing that he had returned, not as her servant, not as her symbol, but as her equal, her friend, and the one who reminded her what it meant to have a heart. The sun rose slowly over the crystal towers of Lyran Prime. The air still carried the smell of smoke from the battle, but the city stood tall. The shields held, the people were safe, and for the first time in many years, the Queen's world had survived a war without conquest. The citizens whispered stories of the human who returned from exile to save them. Some called him brave, others called him a miracle, but to Serafina he was something deeper. He was proof that humanity's heart could shine even among the stars. Ethan woke in the medical chamber, weak but alive. His body ached from exhaustion, and faint lights from healing machines blinked around him. When he opened his eyes, he saw Serafina sitting near his bed, her silver robe folded neatly, her hands resting quietly on her knees. She had not left his side all night. "You're awake," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I thought I was dreaming." "If it were a dream," she replied gently, "I would not have let it end." Ethan tried to sit up, but she stopped him. "You need rest. The battle may be over, but your strength is not endless." He looked at her and said quietly, "I didn't come back to fight. I came back because I couldn't forget what you taught me." Her eyes softened. "And what is that?" "That peace isn't made by rules or crowns," he said. "It's made by people who care enough to protect something precious." For a moment, silence filled the room. The soft hum of machines was the only sound. Then the Queen said, "You speak as if you were born a ruler." He smiled weakly. "Maybe I just learned from one." Over the next few days, the city slowly returned to normal. Ships cleared the sky, citizens rebuilt damaged towers, and everywhere Ethan went, Lyrans looked at him with new respect. Many bowed to him, not because he was human, but because he had fought for their home when no one expected him to. Still, Ethan didn't seek attention. He stayed close to the palace gardens, helping repair what he could, quietly observing the world that had once been his prison, but now felt strangely like home. Serafina began holding council again, but something in her had changed. Her voice was softer, her decisions guided more by compassion than politics. When the council thanked her for victory, she spoke clearly. "Do not thank me. Thank the human who reminded us that loyalty is not born of fear, but of understanding." The council members exchanged glances. They no longer argued with her. The people's faith in their queen had only grown stronger. One evening, when the city lights shimmered like stars below, Serafina found Ethan sitting by the balcony rail, staring at the horizon. The twin moons cast a pale glow across his face. "You look like you're thinking of home," she said. He turned slightly. "Maybe. But sometimes I'm not sure where home is anymore." She stood beside him. "Home is where your heart rests," she said. "Perhaps it no longer belongs to one world." He smiled at that. "You may be right." They stood in silence for a while. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "You know, when I first came here, I thought you were cold and distant. I thought you only saw me as a curiosity." Serafina looked down almost shyly. "And now?" "Now I know you're warmer than anyone I've met," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you that warmth isn't weakness." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "You've given me more than reminders, Ethan. You've given me courage to change." A soft wind passed through the balcony. The stars reflected in her eyes, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke. The feeling between them was quiet but strong, like a tide that had finally reached the shore after a long journey. Later that night, a messenger arrived with a sealed message from the neighboring empire that had attacked. To everyone's surprise, it was not a threat but a proposal for peace. The human act of mercy, Ethan's decision to repair a damaged enemy ship during the battle instead of destroying it, had inspired negotiations. Serafina looked at the message and turned to Ethan. "Even in war, you chose compassion. Because of that, they now wish to talk instead of fight." He shrugged lightly. "Someone once told me compassion is not a weakness." I just believed her. Her heart stirred at his words. She realized that what connected them went beyond kindness. It was trust, built through pain, patience, and understanding. The next morning, the Queen addressed her people from tea. The palace balcony. Ethan stood behind her, watching as she spoke with calm authority. Today our enemies ask for peace not because of fear, but because of an example set by one among us. Let this day remind us that hope can come from anywhere, even from a single heart willing to believe in good. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan watched her with quiet pride. She was radiant under the twin suns, her crown catching the light like fire. When her speech ended, she turned to him and whispered, "You are the reason this world breathes easier today." He looked at her, his voice low. "And you are the reason I found something worth believing in again." As night fell, they walked through the gardens where everything had begun. The air was filled with soft music, and crystal leaves shone with starlight. For a moment, time felt still. They both knew their bond had grown beyond words. It wasn't the bond of ruler and subject, it was something far greater, something that defied the stars themselves. And as the soft wind passed through the trees, Serafina looked at Ethan and whispered, "Perhaps destiny did not bring you here as my servant. Perhaps it brought you here as my heart's equal." Ethan said nothing, but the gentle smile on his face said everything she needed to hear. The morning after the peace announcement was quiet and bright. The air over Lyran Prime was clear for the first time in many months. The twin suns rose side by side, turning the crystal towers into pillars of gold. Everywhere in the city, people smiled again. The markets reopened, children played in the gardens, and even the guards who once looked at Ethan with suspicion now greeted him with respect. It was a new beginning for everyone, but no one felt its weight more deeply than Queen Serafina. She stood at her balcony in silence, looking down at her people. The war had ended without more blood, and her empire had chosen understanding instead of fear. Yet in her heart she knew the credit did not belong to her alone. It belonged to the human who stood by her side when everything was uncertain. Ethan had given her something no crown ever could, the courage to lead with love instead of pride. That same morning, Ethan walked through the palace halls with slow steps. Every face he passed smiled warmly. Some servants bowed slightly, not from duty but from gratitude. He had spent the past few days helping rebuild communication towers and restoring the power grid. Wherever he went, the people whispered his name like a legend. But despite their praise, Ethan felt uneasy. He knew his place in this world was uncertain. He was still human, a visitor in a land not his own. When he entered the Queen's chamber, she turned to him with her usual calm smile. "You've been busy," she said. "The engineers tell me you work harder than 10 of them." Ethan laughed softly. "It keeps my mind quiet. Besides, I like fixing things." Serafina's voice grew gentle. "You've fixed more than machines, Ethan. You've helped mend hearts, including mine." He looked down, feeling warmth rise in his chest. "You don't owe me anything, Serafina. You saved me first." She shook her head. "No, I bought a slave that day. But you made me see what freedom truly means." Their eyes met for a long moment. The space between them carried a silence filled with meaning neither could speak aloud. Then she stepped closer, her tone quiet but sure. "The Council has accepted the peace treaty. They have also accepted that I will rule as I see fit. They no longer question my choices." "That's good," Ethan said softly. "You deserve that." "I do," she replied. "And now I must make one last choice." He looked at her, uncertain. "What choice?" She hesitated, then said, "When I first saw you in chains, I wanted to understand you. But now I realize I don't just understand you, I feel bound to you. Not by power, not by duty, but by something I cannot name." Ethan's heart beat faster. "Serafina," she smiled faintly. "I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a symbol, but as someone who belongs here, beside me." He froze, unable to find words. He had imagined many things since coming back, but not this. "You mean—" Her voice was steady. "Yes, Ethan, I want you to be my equal, my companion, my husband, if your heart allows it." The words hung in the air like light. For a moment, Ethan could only stare at her. Then he said quietly, "You're a queen. I'm just a man from a broken world." She reached out her hand and took his gently. "You are not just a man. You are the reason my world is no longer broken." For the first time, Ethan saw her not as a ruler or an alien, but simply as a soul searching for peace like his own. He squeezed her hand softly. "If I say yes, what happens then?" She smiled, her eyes glowing softly. "Then we show the stars that love can exist even between worlds." News of the Queen's decision spread through the Empire in hours. Some were surprised, some doubtful, but most were moved. The story of the alien queen and the human engineer became a symbol of change. On the day of the ceremony, the palace shone brighter than ever before. The great hall was filled with beings from every race. The same species that once fought against each other now stood side by side. Serafina walked down the aisle wearing no crown, only a simple band of silver around her head. Ethan wore the formal robe of her people, humble yet dignified. When they stood together before the gathering, the air felt still, almost sacred. The queen spoke first. For centuries we built walls between our worlds. We called each other enemies. But today we build something new. Not with power, not with conquest, but with understanding. Then she turned to Ethan and said softly, "From this day you are no longer an outsider. You are part of this world as it is part of you." Ethan looked at her, his voice low but strong. "And from this day I promise to protect this peace we built together, with hope, with honesty, and with love." The hall erupted in gentle applause. Some cried, others smiled, and in that moment the galaxy seemed a little less divided. When the ceremony ended, Serafina and Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking the vast city. The suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and blue. She leaned closer and whispered, "Look at them. They cheer not for a ruler or a hero, but for the idea that two hearts can unite even across the stars." Ethan smiled softly. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." As the crowd below chanted their names, the queen reached for his hand. Together they stood, their silhouettes outlined by the light of two suns, one born of Earth, one of Lyran Prime. And in that quiet glow, their story became legend. The tale of an alien queen and a human who taught the galaxy that love, once found, can heal even the greatest of distances.